Hello and welcome back to Whispers from the Dark. Last week I uploaded a video talking about the spirit of death, better known as the Grim Reaper. This week I'm going to continue with that theme, but in a little different slant. I'm going to talk about how sometimes the medical establishment or the family can cheat the Grim Reaper. I'm going to tell you a story about a guy named BJ that I met back when I was in college. I was riding with my dad in his pickup. He had taken me to get some groceries or something, and it was storming or raining hard. And we're going through a parking lot, shopping center, and you could barely see out the windows of the pickup. And I remember going through I was in the passenger side, and we were going through the parking lot, and we passed a guy in a wheelchair sitting basically in the middle of the parking lot. And what had happened was this guy had gotten groceries or something and was going out the door of the store and through the parking lot to meet a taxi cab that he had called, and it started raining, and he ended up getting one of his wheels caught in a crevice in the concrete, and he couldn't get out of that, and so he was just stuck there. People were passing him, barely able to see him, and nobody stopped. So as soon as we passed him, my dad and I both looked at each other. Dad stopped. I said, "I'll do it." I got out. I went over to this guy and I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "Well, I'm wet." I said, "Well, I see that." He said, "You're wet too." And I said, "Well, yeah, it's raining." And we both had a laugh. And I said, "What's the problem?" And he said, "Well, my wheel's stuck sideways in this. And the front wheel was stuck sideways, and he couldn't get out of it because it was kind of a decline and then a gap in the concrete." And so I helped him get righted out of that. And he said, "You are soaked." And I said, "Yeah, but you could have gotten run over out here. People aren't going to be able to see you very well." And he said, "Yeah, I know. I sure appreciate your help, though. You getting all wet just to help me." I said, "Well, yeah, I can't imagine not helping you." He said, "Well, nobody else stopped." And I said, "Yeah, but that doesn't make it right." So I helped him get back and up under a ledge so he could wait for the cab. My dad offered to take him and cancel the cab, but he said, "No. I couldn't get up in that pickup. I'd have to wait for a cab. It's lower." And so we sit there and waited with him until the cab showed up. And this is before cell phones. We didn't have cell phones then. And the cab showed up and took him, and we went, and he gave us his number. And I didn't have a phone, but my parents did. And so the next time I was out at my parents' house, I called him to see how he was doing, and we became friends. Occasionally I would go see him, or he'd come by and see me if he was out. And over the years we got, pretty close. And so did my parents. My parents thought he was pretty cool. And occasionally they'd make things, like Mom would make something and have me call BJ and see if when they brought me home, could we take some by whatever she had fixed by BJ's house or apartment. And so over the years, he kind of became family. And I remember all the funny stories he told. Man, he had the stories. He was a trip, man. Some of the stories were pretty funny. And some of them were really downright sad. I remember one of the stories he told me, how he became wheelchair bound. And he had an eye patch he wore over his eye. He had a glass eye. And it's really sad. If it's true, and it really happened, and I don't really have any reason not to believe him, it breaks your heart to hear. He told us, or me, that he was divorced and he had a couple little kids, and it was Christmas Eve. He'd gotten off work early and was going to go and drop the gifts off at his ex-wife's house for the kids. Well, the kids were at their grandma's or something. They weren't there. But the ex-wife was there, and she was all messed up, had been drinking or partying or something, and her boyfriend was there. And he knocked on the door, and again, at that time he was able-bodied, wasn't in a wheelchair. His eyes both worked and were fine. And he wanted to drop off the gifts, and his ex-wife told him to leave, and he said, no, it ain't right for the kids not to get Christmas, and so you need to take this. And the ex-wife closed the door, slammed the door. The boyfriend came out, threatened him, and BJ said something about, you got to take these gifts, you're going to give it to the kids when they get back. It's not right for them not to have Christmas. And the ex-wife's boyfriend pulled out a gun and shot him in the head. Shot him, and it went through his eye. And somehow obviously damaged the eye, but he ended up at the hospital, and they didn't think he was going to live. They had him on life support, called his family in, and he said that his parents told him that as they were going up the steps to the hospital, they were met with the doctors wanting them to sign papers for him to be taken off life support. I guess he was a donor, and they wanted to harvest his organs. His mom said, no, I'm going to see him first. And they went in, saw him, and waited with him for a while, and the doctors kept trying to get them to sign him over so they could take him off life support. And she wasn't going to have it. She wanted to wait. And eventually, the doctors were saying, well, he's been shot in the head, he's brain dead. And the mother said, well, we're just going to give him some time. And come to find out, he survived. Now, he was a paraplegic, and he did lose his eye. But he ended up in a wheelchair. And that's not an easy life. Definitely not. But he's gone now. And I debated on whether to tell a story. And I started thinking, he would want it told, because he was all about helping people. He later became a paralegal. He liked to say he was a paraplegic paralegal. And if he could do it, anybody could. And he would help people for free represent themselves, file legal paperwork, and he was an incredible guy. But like I said, I debated on whether to tell his story or not, and I thought, no, he would want it told. He would want people to know that just because the doctors say one thing doesn't mean it's true. Just because the doctors say that, he was a goner didn't mean he was. And the true power of love of a parent standing up for their child, or a family member's love for their fellow family member, can make the difference between life and death. He used to laugh and say that he cheated death so many times in his life. And I don't know what happened when he passed, because I had not talked to him in a while, and then I found out he had passed. But I can tell you that he probably went fighting, because he had so much to do to help people, so much more to do, and I'm sure he just wasn't ready yet. But I'm a better person by knowing him, because I learned a lot from him. And when I needed him, there were several times I called upon him to help me through something, and he led me to what I needed to do to help myself. Legally, he was the guy. He wasn't an attorney, and he didn't play one on TV. But you could not get a better guidance from someone if you wanted to do a case where you represented yourself, or to do anything at all legal. He was the guy. He had the connections. He knew where to research what and how to do it, how to file paperwork. And on top of that, he was also a notary public. So you could go and get your papers notarized by him. Like I said, he was the dude. Everybody needs somebody like BJ in your corner. And I hope in spirit he's still in mine. Because when I think of him fondly and with a smile in my heart. But just to think that the doctors, if what he said is correct, the doctors met his parents outside, coming in the door of the hospital, trying to get them to sign him over. I can't imagine that. I just can't. I've worked in a lot of hospitals over the years, and I've never seen anything like that happen. But this happened several years ago. I'm wanting to say in the 70s, early 80s maybe. I don't know exactly. But I know it was a long time before I met him. And I met him in the early 90s. I think 91. So that's a story about standing up against the medical establishment that is wanting to put your family off of life support so they can harvest organs. That does happen. And you'll hear more of that kind of story in just a minute. Okay, the next story is about a father's undying love for his son. There's a young man in Texas. I believe it was 2015. It was several years ago. He was 27 years old and became unconscious hospital said he'd had a massive stroke. They said he was in a coma, no chance of recovery, that he was brain dead. They talked the mother and brother, I believe, into signing the paperwork to have him taken off life support. He was a registered organ donor. So, from what I've heard in news stories, the hospital had already contacted the donor registry and said that they've got a guy that's going to be an organ donor. And they waited to pull him off life support until his dad could get there and say his goodbyes. His dad showed up, took one look at him and said, "No, he ain't dying." And he went out to the truck or car and he got his gun. And he came back to ICU and literally waved off all the medical people and said, "I'm protecting my son, you need to give him more time." And they said, "No, we need to take him off now so we can use his organs." The dad threatened people, supposedly, and said, "Y'all get back." And so they, of course, left the room, called security, called the police, SWAT team showed up, and they had a 3-hour standoff. While this poor dad laid over his son's body in ICU on life support. And he was holding his son's hand, begging him to wake up, begging him to give him a sign, let him know he was okay. After about 3 hours, his son started squeezing his hand. So he knew that he was right and his son was okay. His son wasn't brain dead. About that time, SWAT busts in the door. They talk him into giving himself up and giving up the weapon, and they take him to jail. That poor man stayed, I believe, either 10 or 11 months in jail for bringing a gun into the hospital, making threats, and that kind of thing. But he gladly did it knowing he saved his son's life. So when he got out, his son was there to help greet him when he got out. So, if that right there doesn't teach you a lesson, to never listen to doctors. Don't trust what they tell you, because chances are there might be a hidden agenda. There was in his case. Now I'm going to let you see the news story that was aired in a Russian TV channel. Pretty amazing. Even Russia carried this story.
And a Christmas happy ending to a chilling story for one Texas family to tell you about, where a desperate father had to take a gun to save his son's life. Stay with me here. Not from criminals, but from medics. 11 months ago, 27-year-old George Pickering III was within an inch of death, lying in a critical care unit after a massive stroke. But doctors declared him brain dead indeed, and approved taking him off life support. That was too much for his dad. This guy was even placed on an organ donation register with the consent of his mother and brother. Well, the story goes on. His distraught father could not believe that that was the only option. So, as I said, he marched him to hospital with a gun. He barricaded himself in that ward, refusing to leave his son's side, and apparently threatened staff too. So desperate was he.
He's pointing the gun like this.
We immediately give us security and call 911.
Well, the incident resulted in a lengthy standoff with police, after which the dad surrendered. His lawyer told us how events unfolded after that.
Towards the end of the standoff, which was about 3 hours long, he felt his son squeeze his hand. And about that time, the SWAT team had actually opened the door to the critical care room, and he had surrendered to the police, but he surrendered knowing that his son had squeezed his hand. The SWAT team had their own doctors, and when their own doctors entered into the critical care room, they saw that my client's son was not brain dead because he was making eye contact, he was following their commands, and they were completely amazed at this.
Shortly after that, George Pickering III came out of that coma and made a full recovery. However, his father was behind bars and had been sentenced to 10 months for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon for that incident. Charges, though, were finally dropped, and he's been released this month. The father and son are now back together for Christmas.
They were moving too fast. The hospital, the nurses, the doctors.
There was a law broken, but it was broken for all the right reasons. I'm here now because of it.
I don't think that he would have survived, but for the fact that his father slowed the process down. Certainly my client bears some responsibility in that he didn't handle the situation very well, but my heart goes out to him because I know how much he loves his son and that he was just completely, he was just grieving. Their relationship is just truly amazing to me. They are extraordinarily close. It's been a really wonderful Christmas present for me to see those two guys back together and that my client is back with his son. The case was about the love he has for his son and the fact that he was there to protect his son when his son couldn't protect himself.
Well, that's it for today, folks. I appreciate you guys stopping by, and I hope these stories gave you something to think about. Rest in peace, BJ. And my thoughts and prayers go to the Pickering family. And I applaud Mr. Pickering for doing what he did for his son. That had to have been hard. Good night, guys. Don't forget, hit the like, hit subscribe, and leave me a comment. Until next time, stay safe out there. Bye.